Welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
Welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here on this Weight Loss and Wellness Wednesday, where we are going to be talking about all things intermittent fasting. So most likely by now, you've heard about stopping your eating for 12 hours, 14 hours, 16 hours, or maybe even 20 hours per day. Well, recently, there were a couple of studies released that have literally set the diet and intermittent fasting dogma and groups on fire. These are the studies that essentially broke the internet just a few weeks back, sharing with people potentially some of the dangers of doing intermittent fasting for 16 hours or more per day. But you know that I want to stay unbiased, that I always give you what the research shows and also what we found in the real world. Now, so I'm going to share it from both sides and be very honest about this. But I have to let you know that people that are just not going with the flow, that are promoting whatever the latest fad diet is, already knew. If you were a practitioner, you already knew this was the case. So that's the thing. I urge you to always really listen to what someone on YouTube or write in an article or anything things might be saying. It doesn't mean that they're wrong, right? It doesn't mean that the person on Instagram saying that this diet was the best thing ever doesn't mean that they're wrong. It means it worked for them, and that's great, but it also may have worked in just the short term, and I want to get to that in just a moment. We have to be very careful of recommending these carnivore diets or keto diets or long fasts for everyone, because it just might not be the case. And again, practitioners see this because they look at statistics, they look at the numbers. So when someone comes into my practice, I'm looking at their baseline of where they are, and then I'm also seeing what they've been doing, and then I get them onto a program or protocol, and I lab test again 12 weeks later. So we have to understand is that we know, and you can know exactly what works for your body based on your own bioindividuality and through at-home lab testing. So never discount that, never overlook that, because you would not be one of these statistics, right? So here's just the thing. We're going to go through two very different studies. However, the theme was both studies used a 16-hour intermittent fast that we called time-restricted eating, TRE, that's 16 hours of the day. And the other group was 3 meals per day that allowed people to eat essentially over 12 or 13 hours. So very, very interesting. The first study was different, and this is the one that, again, really upset a lot of people. When you look at the comments on this article, you would think that something was said about their own family, right? Because people get so locked into their dogma. They believe that their diet that they're following right now is like some type of religion, or it's something that they have to defend. Remember, this is food we're talking about. And really, in the health-based space, if you are a proponent of health, you want to do what is best for your client or your patient, right? So we have a lot of doctors, a lot of practitioners listen to this. I've seen so many MDs over the past 3, 4, 5 years go full tilt on keto. And again, like as a doctor, as a practitioner, you have to be careful with that, because we know that's not what's best for everybody. We know that just by looking at labs. We see what it can do to sometimes lipid panels. We know what it can do to alkaline phosphatase and other catabolic markers. We know what it can do to many women in their thyroid. So again, I'm not actually talking negatively about a 16-hour fast at all. You've heard me talk about it through Fatlocity, through specific types of intermittent fasting, who it's best for. I stay out of this. I stay unbiased, and I share with you what really works in the real world. And really, it's been backed up by this study. The studies were okay. They weren't bad studies. People like to say, oh, it was a bad study. It wasn't a bad study. Just because it didn't move in your favor doesn't mean it's a bad study. We can't just cherry pick all the different studies that we like, and the ones that don't show in our favor, they don't count. That's not being a good statistician or practitioner. So here's the thing, though. The people who don't like the first study will most likely like the second study, okay? So we'll get to both, because the first study does not look very kindly on a 16-hour fast per day. That means the eating window for this study was between noon, 12 o'clock, and 8 p.m., okay? So here was the thing with this study. There were two groups, okay? There was the time-restricted eating, that's 16-hour fast a day, and then there was the control group, essentially, or just 3 meals per day. And both groups were allowed to eat as many calories as they would like. So quality of food didn't matter, okay? I'm not saying that, but both groups got to do the same thing, okay? Both groups got to do the same thing. One got to eat as much as they wanted at 3 different meals per day. One got to eat as much as they wanted at 3 different meals, but the meals had to be between 12 p.m. and 8 p.m., okay? So that's what we're really looking at. That was the difference, 16 hours versus just what they considered normal diet, and you could eat over the course of those 12 or 13 hours. All right, so what did we find, though? Well, this was a 12-week, 3-month study. And believe it or not, the 16-hour fasted group lost 2.07 pounds over the 12 weeks. And the second group, which was not the 16-hour fasted group, not the time-restricted eating, they lost 1.49 pounds. So when you look at the surface of this, if you're just looking at surface-level studies, which a lot of people do, right? And they just say, hey, 16-hour fasting, better than regular group. Here's why. They lost about a half a pound more. And you would be right if you were just looking at the scale. But the great thing about this study is they did a DEXA scan as well. So they measured lean body mass compared to fat mass. And here's what they found. The time-restricted eating group, the group that didn't eat for 16 hours between 8:01 p.m. and all the way to 12 o'clock the next day, which again, a lot of people are doing right now, and that's the time frame, they actually lost 2.4 pounds of lean body mass. That means they didn't actually lose any body fat. They lost, and they actually gained body fat in the study, so they lost 2.4 pounds. Now on the scale though, the scale only moved 2.07 pounds, which means they gained almost a half a pound of fat. So they didn't, not only did they not lose any weight, they lost muscle, they gained a little fat, and what's worse, the muscle they lost was a clear sign of aging and being in a catabolic state. And that's because they lost the muscle mass off of their arms and legs, which you don't want. So as we get older, we start to lose the mass on our limbs, right? On our arms and our legs. We become more catabolic. That is not good in terms of strength, endurance, fall prevention, etc., right? Bone mass, any one of those things. So that was not a very good sign right there in that 16-hour fasting group. Now, group 2, here's the thing. They lost 0.77 pounds of lean body mass. Not 2.4, but 0.77. So but they lost 1.49 pounds overall. So the truth is they actually lost about 3/4 of a pound of body fat. So group 1, the 16-hour fast, they gained a little fat and lost muscle. Group 2, they lost a little bit of both, right? They lost body fat and they lost a little bit of muscle mass. So overall for the study, I would say not very convincing either way. But here's the truth, right? It wasn't a controlled study in terms of how much they were eating, so not ideal. But the truth was that they were allowed to eat in both groups as much as they really wanted. And the 16-hour group, well, they lost a lot of body mass. I mean, in 12 weeks, just stripping mass off the body. And that means their metabolism is going lower and lower. So this group was even, it was fair, it wasn't very good in terms of the nutrition because that wasn't controlled, but it did look at the 16-hour versus the not. And in this group, that means like, so I'm gonna bring this together for you at the end, but you can't just have people say, well, I'm just not gonna eat now for 16 hours, but I can eat whatever I want between 12 and 8. Because the truth is, like, this study was legitimate because people do that all the time. They do it all the time. They say, I'm just gonna time restrict what I eat to these hours, and yeah, I might lose a little weight. And you would lose about 2 pounds, it showed, over those 12 weeks, even if you didn't restrict the type of calories or alcohol, etc. But the problem is you would be losing muscle mass. So not ideal. So this is not good. This was not a good sign. And again, all the 16-hour proponents, they were all up in arms talking about all the bad things about this study. Sure, I get it. But here's the deal. It is the truth, because that's the majority of people on a standard American diet, a Western-based diet. They do 16 hours of fasting. This is what's going to happen. So the study's legitimate, not perfect, but it is legitimate. Now, here's the good news, and there is good news for all those people that love fasting. And by the way, I'm one of those people. So in all of my protocols, except for about 1% of the population, because there's always outliers, but those people with hypoglycemia, CFS, adrenal-based issues, myalgic encephalomyelitis, etc., those people are not going to be doing a 16-hour fast or 14-hour fast. In my practice, we're typically doing more like 12 to 14 hours. We don't typically get to the 16 hours, though there are some people that will use it for. However, let's look at this. That previous study, I'll link this up today. Just head over to stevencabral.com/1783. The first study was published in JAMA. It was called Effects of Time-Restricted Eating on Weight Loss and Other Metabolic Parameters in Women and Men with Overweight and Obesity. Okay, again, 2/3 of the population are overweight and obesity. Now, the second study is out of BMS, and it's in the Journal of Translational Medicine. The second study was called Effects of 8 Weeks of Time-Restricted Feeding on Basal Metabolism, Maximal Strength, Body Composition, Inflammation, and Cardiovascular Risk Factors in Resistance-Trained Males. Okay? 8-week study, not 12 weeks. Different parameters, okay? These two groups now, okay, time-restricted eating. In this group, it's now TRF instead of TRE. It's time-restricted feeding. You don't really have to worry too much about that. And again, if you want to follow along, go to stevencabral.com/1783. 8 weeks long, and they split it into 3 meals per day for both groups. There was a 16-hour group, just like the first group, and this group ate at 1 p.m., 4 p.m., and 8 p.m. Okay, so they basically stayed, again, within that 8-hour window. Now, the second group was 12 hours, not 16. And they ate at 8 a.m., 1 p.m., and 8 p.m. Now, the macros were regimented in the study, so it was much more fair. There's just one caveat I like to call out. And I'll do it towards the end. I don't want to confuse it right now. Okay. So we've got the 16-hour group. They ate at 1 p.m., 4 p.m., and 8 p.m. The 12-hour group ate at 8 a.m., 1 p.m., and 8 p.m. Now, what they did was they stayed pretty close in macros, so about the same amount of carbs, protein, and fat in each group. I'll tell you what that is in just a moment. But they also did 3 days of resistance training. And one of the caveats for this program is, one, you couldn't be on anabolic steroids and you couldn't have been in your past. And they cleared people for that. The second was, because they actually did this from people in a gym, that you had to be doing resistance training for at least 5 years, okay, and at least 3 days a week. So 3 days of resistance training was part of this program. And I want to show you the results as well, but I'm going to give you their resistance training program because I actually think that that's important because I'm going to be calling that out. The resistance training program consisted of 3 different weekly sessions. The first one was bench press, so basically like chest and biceps, think of it that way. The second one was shoulders and legs. The third one was back and triceps. So kind of like a bodybuilder-based routine, okay, split sessions, and it involved 3 sets of 6 to 8 repetitions at 85 to 90% of their 1 rep max. And these were all performed basically to failure, okay? And 180 seconds between sets and exercises. So between your work and your rest. So if you want to mimic this, you would go through your different exercises. You would take 3 minutes between each exercise. You would do them 3 times, and each set, each time you go through like a bench press, it would be between 6 and 8 reps. So pretty standard, right? That's a kind of a bodybuilder-based routine. These people had already been exercising. Okay, so here's the interesting thing, though. I'm going to give you these statistics now. There was no loss in muscle mass this time around. Okay, even though calories were reduced, there was no loss in muscle mass. Now, this is very interesting because the first group, they could eat whatever they wanted, right? That was basically a part of it, and they lost muscle. There was no loss in muscle mass. A lot of people try to say that was because of the increase in protein. I completely disagree. The author of the study even thinks that it might have to do with the increase in protein. I'll tell you right now, I don't agree with that whatsoever. I don't agree with that. Here's why. When I look at the calories per day in the macros, the people in this study ate, let me see if I wrote it down for you. I basically memorized it, but it was, I'll pull it up for you right now because I want to give you the straight statistics. Okay. It was about 20 to 21% protein. That was the macros. That is not a high amount of protein. That's about the amount of protein that I recommend for the average individual out of their calories per day. That's based on anti-aging, that's based on cancer studies, et cetera. And I just talked about it on yesterday's podcast. Hopefully you tuned into that about fasting and anabolism as well and preventing cancer. So here's what we know. That's not more than the average person eats for protein per day. Like, no doubt about it. I would actually say it's a little bit less. So I don't think protein was the end all be all. If we actually tracked the calories and the macros from the JAMA-based study, it would be at least that. I mean, it really would. And that is not a difficult amount of protein to get on a daily basis, okay? It's just not. When we look at their fat, it was about 25%, and their carbs was 53%. That means both groups, the 16-hour versus the 12-hour, they got about 53% of their diet from carbs, 25% from fat, and 20 to 21% from protein. Now, most people, when they see 53% calories from carbs, they would lose their mind. Like, it's way too many carbs. You could never lose weight that way. The truth is it's not. And I've tried to talk about this over and over. And it may even be more beneficial for you in the long run, because your body then doesn't become desensitized to carbohydrates, right? What matters is what those carbs look like as well. Well, here's the thing. When we looked at this, these weren't like super low calorie diets either. The time restricted feeding was 2,826 calories per day. Okay, there was a pretty big plus minus of about 400 calories. The no diet, like normal diet, was 3,007 calories. Now, I found this interesting because when they extrapolated the data, it was only about 30 calories, they said, plus or minus per day. But if we look at what they were regimented at, it was about 181 calories per day between the 16-hour and then the normal diet. And to me, they didn't make a big deal about it. That's statistically significant to me. So as a practitioner, over a week, it's 1,267 calorie difference. And over the 8 weeks, I think that's about 10,000 calories in difference, right? So I just want to make sure that that's the right number for you. So 1,267 times 8, we get, 10,136. That's at least, I mean, that for most people, if you're just going by straight stats, that's about 3 pounds weight loss. So to me, that's statistically significant. They have more insight than I do into the study. So I'm just going with them. I'm going with the flow with this and saying that it might just be about 200, 250 calories per week. And over the course of 8 weeks, we're looking at, 2,000 calories. So maybe that's a half a pound difference. So I don't think it's weighted exact, but good enough, And here's what they found though, because this was significant. When we looked at the amount of lean mass, like their muscle, their metabolism, nobody lost any muscle mass, which is great. The time restricted feeding group actually put on about 0.86 pounds. So not quite a pound, but 0.86. And the normal diet put on 0.64. So close, but definitely more for the time restricted feeding too, which is very interesting. And now, especially if they have less calories. So now let's look at the weight loss difference, because this is what got interesting. I think it was 16.4%. That was the fat loss, compared to 2.8% in the study. And I'm going to pull this study up. Again, you can just go to stephencabral.com/1783 for these exact studies. The studies are quite long, so that's why I'm giving you the actual results from those. So that's a huge difference, right? The 16% versus the 2.8% or so in those results. So absolutely clinically significant. The fasting group lost more weight, and this time they didn't lose any muscle. Now, what does this mean though? Because it always has to have meaning to you. I do not believe it was the protein content that enabled them to lose more body fat and keep the mass on. And here's why. Both groups were exactly the same. The fasting group lost more body fat. They didn't really put on a whole lot more muscle, right? So I don't think it was that. And again, I don't believe the JAMA group ate less than 20% of their calories from protein. I don't believe that for a second. The average American eats plenty of meat and cheese and eggs and milk, and they're getting plenty of protein. They really are, right? We need to reduce it for most people if you listen to yesterday's show. But here was the difference. 3 days a week of resistance training. It was a game changer in people's metabolism, an absolute game changer. If you are fasting and you are doing a longer fast, greater than 12 hours, it is my opinion, and I believe these studies are starting to bear out, that you need to do resistance training. Not this exact workout. You can do much better workouts than this one, but you need to do resistance training. I mean, these are pretty straightforward. These people were only doing 9 sets, 12 sets. That's it of exercise. These aren't long workouts at all. Like, we're not talking about, crushing workouts. And a lot of them were just normal bodybuilder type exercises. I mean, really no big deal. Bench press, lat pull down, some legs. I think that's like no big deal at all. But they preserved the muscle mass, and they most likely allowed the body to be more sensitive to those carbohydrates they were eating. So yes, people are going to be more and more sensitive to carbs if they don't exercise. The key takeaway is that the 12, the 14, the 16-hour fasting can be an absolute game changer in terms of your health, your overall hormones, and anti-aging. But you have to add the exercise with it. If you intermittent fast for 16 hours a day and you don't add resistance training, it looks like it's going to be detrimental to your overall health and your metabolism in the long run. And I believe that for many years, and here's why. And this actually bared out. Nobody likes to mention this, but in the 16-hour window as well, they found that their thyroid levels began to decrease and testosterone levels began to decrease as well. Was growth hormone in there as well? Let me just check for you right here. And yes, so the positive hormones began to decrease. Testosterone, insulin-like growth factor, IGF-1, and leptin began to decrease, and thyroid began to decrease. And this was only in 8 weeks. So I just want to mention to you that 16 weeks may not be the 16 hours a day may not be the end all be all. And it is my opinion. And again, I believe that this will be bared out in the future in future research studies, just like Ayurveda said. Your fasting should really come earlier in the night, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock at night. And if you want to bring it all the way to 16 hours, okay. Somewhere around 9, 10 a.m., we start eating again. Okay? Why? Because we don't get into that deeper catabolic state. We do not, when our bodies start to get stressed, and I can't go down this road because I've done many podcasts already on it, and I'm already over my time for today. But here's the thing. As your body becomes more catabolic, stress hormones increase, thyroid decreases, testosterone decreases, progesterone levels decrease. Like, these are important factors to look at that, again, you learn when you start to look at the endocrine system, the hormones within the body. Go back, check out my previous podcast on fasting. You can go to stevencabral.com/podcasts. You can just scroll through the top images, click on fasting. I will teach you exactly how the adrenals affect the thyroid, how the adrenals also affect estrogen levels and progesterone levels in the body. This is really important because this was in men. If it was done in women, we would have shown most likely those thyroid levels go even lower. So all of this matters. Really great news. You can keep your intermittent fasting going, but do add in those 3 days a week of resistance training every single week. Hopefully this was helpful. More to come, of course. Go to stevencabral.com/1783 for the studies. And again, if this was helpful, please do feel free to share it with anyone you believe it could serve. Before you go, I wanted to ask you this question. What if I could teach you in just a couple of hours how to transform your thyroid, hormones, adrenal, cholesterol, blood pressure, blood sugar, weight loss, energy, mood, brain, pregnancy, anti-aging, or many other health-related issues? After 20 years in private practice, after seeing and overseeing 250,000 client appointments, I sincerely feel I have the real-world data and have found the answer you've been searching for. So what I've done is spent hundreds of hours of my own time refining what you need to know in order to uncover your underlying root cause health issues and then begin to rebalance the body and bring it back to a state of robust health and wellness. I'm going to teach you exactly what I do in my private practice so you can understand how you got here and now what you need to do in order to heal. You'll receive all of the important success checklists, protocols, and even ways to customize it to make the program fit your busy life. And you'll get all of this at a fraction of the price. Let me save you the time, money, energy, stress, and frustration of not knowing what to do next. Instead of reading dozens of books on the topic and seeing multiple practitioners, I will condense everything that you need to know in just a few hours of video tutorials that you can watch and listen to anywhere. Together, we will make this healing process an enjoyable one that you can take with you for the rest of your life. I wish you all of the best of health and happiness, and I hope to be able to guide you on your healing journey through my Health Results Accelerators. Simply choose the health imbalance you're currently suffering from, and by the end of today, you'll know what went wrong and how to get well again. I guarantee it. For details, head over now to stephencabral.com/courses.